Several years ago, when I was on the pastoral staff at the Sewickley Presbyterian Church, my husband David and I were invited to a Friday night Sabbath dinner at some Jewish friends of ours who lived in Sewickley. It was every year, many Jewish families in the area invited their Christian friends to the Friday night supper so that we could share our faith with one another. Well, it began as dinner parties often do, a lot of talking and a lot of appetizers and a few drinks. And there were 12 of us when we sat down to the table. I thought that was kind of unique, given that there were 12 when Jesus had his Last Supper. And as dinner began that Sabbath evening, 2 candles were on the table. And the wife of the house lit the first candle, and it was called the Remember candle. And then she lit the second candle, and it was called the Observe candle. She told us that the Remember candle is to reflect what the book of Exodus tells the Jewish people, that we are to remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Remember, that's one of the 10 Commandments. And then she said the Observe candle reflects the book of Deuteronomy that says about the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Any of you remember when we had blue laws in Pennsylvania and you couldn't do a lot of things on Sunday? Many stores were not open. You couldn't buy gas. You couldn't do much of anything. Well, I have to tell you, that evening was really an exquisite evening. It was delightful. It was delicious. It was really a holy time when we were together, and I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. This morning, I am lighting 2 candles. One, a Remember candle, and one, an Observe candle. And I'm relating them to Thanksgiving to help us as Americans, first of all, remember why we're thankful, and second, to help us observe how we express our thankfulness as Christians. First, the Remember candle. I wonder, what's the first Thanksgiving that you can remember yourselves? Maybe you were with grandparents or aunts or uncles around a table that had really too much food. Or maybe it was a rather lean Thanksgiving when things weren't so good in your household for you or your family. Or maybe it was the first one when you were away from your family. Maybe you were at school or in the military or working out of town and didn't have enough money to get a ticket to come back home. I remember as a child, my mother told my sister and me that we were supposed to share extra special on Thanksgiving. Now that meant when all the relatives came to our house, we weren't supposed to take food first. We were supposed to take it last in case it ran out. And when our adult relatives ask us questions, we weren't supposed to sit there like dimwits and not answer, you know? We were supposed to say yes, ma'am, and no, sir, and answer their questions. That was kind of hard because we had 2 great aunts who were school teachers, and every time we talked, they corrected us. And sometimes we had to share our beds because so many cousins came to see us that there weren't enough beds for them to sleep in. So we shared our beds as well. And then I could remember as a child clutching my little nickel or dime or penny and going to Sunday school every Sunday. We had a Sunday school superintendent who kind of led the show, kind of like Melanie. And she would say, her name was Mrs. Ferris, and she would say, okay, boys and girls, it's now time to give thanks to God. And we got to pass the plates, kind of like we do in worship. We thought that was a really big deal. So growing up in my church, I heard over and over again, you have to be thankful. You have to show your thanks. You have to say thank you. I can remember hearing Bible stories from Mrs. Ferris that really came down pretty harshly on people in the Bible who didn't give thanks, who didn't share their nickels and dimes like we were supposed to do. One of those passages, it really almost made me cry, and I went home and asked my mother. Jesus said, "Woe to you who are rich." And I said to my mother, "Are we rich?" And she said, "Well, we're probably richer than most people in the world." And I worried about that for a long time. Still do. The rich fool, remember, laid up treasures for himself and wasn't rich toward God. And then Jesus said, anyone who doesn't say farewell to all that he has cannot be a disciple of mine. Give away all you have to the poor and follow me. That's a tough one. We didn't have a lot when I was growing up, but I always sensed we had more than most of the people around the world. I knew somehow that I should be thankful for what we did have. When I was about 11, my little friend next door, who was Roman Catholic, we were talking about what we wanted to be when we grew up. And she told me she wanted to be a nun. But she had heard that she had to give away all her worldly goods. She used that phrase, all her worldly goods. Well, I commiserated with her for a while. And then I went home and said to my mother, what's she going to do with her unworldly goods? Because I knew that she had a lot of unworldly goods that were her toys. Just 2 months before I was to go off to college, my father's business went into bankruptcy. And there was a pretty sure that I couldn't go to college because of that. And the college, which is Davis and Elkins in West Virginia, found the money for me to attend, thanks to an elder from my home church, who called the president of the college and interceded for me. After I graduated, I remembered sending my first gift to D&E. I think it was only $5 that I sent to them as a gift. But for the 50 years plus since my college graduation, every time I write a check to my alma mater, I remember their generosity, and I am so very, very thankful. I remember the cards I used to receive when I went on to seminary. We didn't have email back then, we just had snail mail. And cards from one family in particular in my home church, the Presbyterian Church in Fairmont. That card came almost every week, stuffed with a $20 bill. Now that was a lot of money back then. And a note of encouragement to them. Even today, when I send my annual gift to my home church, I remember the generosity of Mr. and Mrs. Stroud. And I am so thankful for them. I remember being the guest preacher at a little African-American Baptist church on Larimer Avenue in East Liberty when I was going to seminary. We had a pulpit exchange, and I drew the card to go to the African-American church and preach. Well, the president of the congregation, he sat at a table right in front the whole service. When it was time for the offering, the ushers took the offering, and they brought it up to him and put it on the table in front of him. And while the organist was doodling, he counted all the money. I'm sitting there with my eyes wide open. And he got up, he said, well, brothers and sisters, we don't have enough in this offering, so we're sending the baskets around again. And they did. He said the first offering was for the people outside the church. This offering is going to take care of our expenses. So more doodling on the organ. People took the offering, brought the money back to him. He counted it. And would you believe, friends, we need more. I'm sending this one more time, and I want money in this basket. More doodling, and they finally got the money. I've often thought, as a pastor for 45 years, there's something to be said for that. As I look at the candle named Remember, I recall the challenge that the Bible gives me, a challenge to tithe. Now that means 10%, 10% of the gross of our income. And in the Old Testament, there were also offerings on top of the 10%. Just like we have in our church today. We have 1 great hour of sharing in, when is that, Lent, right? And we have the Christmas offering coming up soon. And so as a pastor, that's why when I call for an offering, I say, let us bring our tithes and our offerings, a little bit extra, like that second passing of the plates in the Baptist church. The second candle of Thanksgiving helps me remember, first candle helps me remember that I am to be thankful all the days of my lives, from the time that I was 5 years old, from the time that I'm 74 years old. I'm to be thankful all the days of my life. The second candle of Thanksgiving helps me observe all the ways I can show how grateful and thankful I am. First, I can express my thankfulness better when I let go of all the emotional and physical ties that my wealth invariably creates for me. All these ties to things that I have. When we moved a couple years ago from our potential 7-bedroom house on Dixon Avenue in Ben Avon to a small patio home at Sherwood Oaks, I observed this needing to get rid of stuff in spades. The necklace that I am cleaning out my jewelry box that belonged to my mother, how can I let that go? The sweater that belonged to my sister who died young, I need to keep that. Those purses that belonged to my great aunts when they gave them to me year after year at Christmas time, frankly, I never would have bought that stuff for myself. I didn't need it, and frankly, most of it I didn't even like. But except for the emotional ties that I had to these things. So I thought, well, I don't like this necklace. I'm going to keep one piece of jewelry. I'm going to keep one thing from my sister. I'm going to make one thing from my great aunts. A few of my friends at Sherwood Oaks have actually rented storage units outside Sherwood Oaks to keep their stuff in, because it wouldn't fit into their new patio homes. Now go figure. I got rid of that stuff beforehand. I'm not going to take stuff with me to get rid of. I knew in my head that I needed to cut those ties and give things away, to share it with people who really did need it. And it was easy to find places to share. In the past, I think I lacked a sense of enoughness. I needed to say to myself, enough is enough. This is enough for me. And giving stuff away, I was so thankful that I could do that. One of the saddest stories in the New Testament is the meeting between Jesus and the rich man. This is the only time in Mark's gospel when Jesus says, "Come and follow me." The only time he says that, and somebody did not. The rich man went away because Jesus told him to sell what he owned and give it to the poor. The rich man was shocked by this answer. The scripture says he was grieved. He thought his wealth was a sign of how good he was, that God had blessed him with all that wealth. So he turned his back on Jesus and he went away in tears because he was too attached to his possessions. He lacked a sense of enoughness like I used to. And he never knew the joy of observing, giving thanks. So I have to observe how I live and how I use my wealth. Yesterday, I officiated at the funeral service for Kathy Johnston. It was a lovely service, and many of you were there. They passed out something that I've posted out in the narthex, and there are extra copies of it. But 5 years ago, before Kathy started her very slippery sliding slope into dementia, she wrote a piece for our newsletter. It was our 25th anniversary as a consolidated church here, and she wrote, everybody was asked to write how the church affected them. I just want to read a couple things to you. She was married to her first husband, Ken. Suddenly, in 1964, Ken became ill. Doctors could not determine what happened, and by the end of 1 week, he was dead at the age of 33. I was suddenly a single mother with 3 daughters and no job. Unbeknownst to me, one member of the session at the church began to bring attention to our problems. Monetary gifts were set up in a fund by the church to cover the bills that were coming due. Part of the fund was to help me have a car for the one that was no good. All of this was overwhelming, she said. To this day, I don't know who was secretly helping me. Christmas gifts appeared on our porch, more than one for each daughter. With Easter came baskets and colored eggs and chocolate bunnies. One person even left a receipt for church camp in the summer. We never saw anyone leaving these gifts. Many, like new clothes, were sent to the children that helped out tremendously. Raking leaves was a huge job. Kathy lived on the road up to the Heights in the gray house then that sits down below with the 2 garages right on the road. So lots of leaves. Tom Phillips appeared one day with the youth group. Each had a rake and they went to work. The job was completed in no time. One spring day, our dog began to bark wildly. I looked outside and I saw 2 men in overalls, and I asked, "What are you doing? You must be at the wrong house." They said, "Oh no, we're here to paint your house." I asked for their ID and they were very quiet. Finally, they called Laurie McBride. He explained to me the work was to be done anonymously, and they painted our house. This is from Kathy when days were bad for her, really tough for her. Many of you know we had a fire in Ben Avon last night over on Beringer Place behind the mini mart at the Avalon Loop. The house is gone. It was a duplex. So when I heard that this morning driving in on the car radio, I thought of Kathy and how the church came up to help her. And if we're a community church, I say let's get to work and find out who those people were and what we can do. Friends, Christ did not call us to be successful. Christ called us to be faithful. Christ calls us to show our thankfulness by opening our hands. I know I have a long way to go, but I believe God can lead all of us and to teach us how to observe, to be thankful. I believe God can unwad the tightest tightwad. I believe God can uncheap the cheapest cheapskate. God can help us remember and observe because of his sacrificial love for us. Friends, I invite you to put 2 candles on your Thanksgiving table on Thursday to help you remember God's generous love and help you observe the myriad of blessings that we have that we can share with one another. Thanks be to God. Amen.